The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. This is Christina, the Communications Marketing Manager here at NYLA. Thank you so much for joining our 2020 Council Candidates Forum. So today we have our NYLA President candidates here. Thank you so much for participating in this forum. Just a few housekeeping things. Elections will begin June 15th and close July 15th. You have to be a NYLA member in order to vote. You can check your status by logging into your account, and it will tell you whether or not you're still an active member. Also note that this will be recorded and shared shortly after the forum, ideally by the end of the week into next week. So with that being said, to begin, we'll be starting with our candidate statements. Each of our candidates have prepared 2 to 3 minutes to let you know why they are running for NYLA President, and etc. And then after the candidate statements, we will go into the questions that we have asked our candidates beforehand, and then we'll go into the Q&A portion. We'll start with the questions that were submitted when you registered, and then if you have any questions throughout from now to the Q&A, just put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring those as well. So without further ado, we'll have our candidates do our candidate statements. So Beth, you're first.
All right, thank you. My name is Beth Merkel, and I'm running for NYLA President, obviously. In these unprecedented and challenging times, we need our State Library Association more than ever. For 125 years, NYLA has been at the forefront of providing library advocacy, professional development, continuing education, and intellectual freedom protections. Now it helps lead the library community through essential initiatives like sustainability. NYLA is the voice of New York's library community. That voice needs to be loud and clear in the months and years ahead. Libraries are central to New York's economic, educational, and cultural recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. As NYLA President, I will work to make the New York Library Association an even stronger and more robust advocate and resource for library workers and libraries across the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz, your turn.
Thank you. Hi, and thanks for attending the forum. I'd like to first thank NYLA for giving Beth and me the opportunity to speak, and also for giving its members the opportunity to learn more about the candidates running for NYLA President. So I'm Liz King, and I'm also running for NYLA President. I believe that NYLA's next president from an academic or special library, must be able to represent all libraries, schools, publics, specials, and academic. The next NYLA president will be leading through times of uncertainty and change, and it will be essential to separate the signal from the noise and leverage our current partnerships and new partnerships and resources to keep our association headed towards a sustainable and bright future. So we all need NYLA now more than ever to help the New York community adapt and change to continue to have a real impact going forward. After working in libraries for the last 15 years and benefiting and learning from great leaders in our profession and also our organizations, I'm ready to step up and to lead and educate and advocate for the advancement of our libraries and our communities. I believe that information is power, whether it's kids looking for picture and chapter books with characters that represent them, or library patrons expanding their skills through technology classes, or in my case, students and faculty retrieving data sets and scholarly articles. And I believe in the equitable access to that information. So I believe that the next effective NYLA president must listen to the needs of its many members and be willing to manage risks when acting in the pursuit of all of our shared goals. I believe that we're stronger when we work together. And in a nutshell, for those who don't know me already, I am an optimist and an idealist, but one with realistic expectations. And so far that strategy has served me pretty well. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and sharing some of my ideas and priorities for our library communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much. So let's start with the NYLA prepared questions. And just for people trickling in, I put in the chat just a little bit of the flow of the forum. So we're going to do NYLA questions now. If you have questions that come to mind, make sure to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring them. And right after the NYLA prepared questions, we'll open it up to the Q&A portion, first with pre-submitted questions, and then those that were put in the chat. So, our first question is, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you would want voters to know about you. So let's start with Liz.
Thank you. So I gave this a lot of thought. A little bit about me that I'd like for you to know as a voter. My background is I grew up in Germany. I was an Air Force brat. And then I moved to Plattsburgh in the North Country of New York when I was 7. And then I went to college in Long Island and Binghamton and then Albany. And I'm currently in Troy. So my family's in Ithaca and some family and friends in Brooklyn. And all of that is to kind of paint the map and let you know that I really do feel passionately about New York State. And I'm passionate personally in the Adirondacks, anything that has to do with being outside. And then, of course, why Beth and I are both here today, I think I can say we both love libraries. So growing up in a military family, I moved around a lot. If anybody listening in has had that experience, they know that how that goes. But I always was able to visit and feel at home in the library in whatever country or city or town I was in. So it wasn't a stretch that I ended up working in libraries. I'm currently in the role of Associate Director at our PI libraries. Right before that, I was a research, instruction, and outreach librarian at a large emerging research library. And then I also worked in public libraries in the Capital Region for many years. And my library school internship was in archives, although that was pretty brief. A fun fact about me I'll close out on is before becoming a librarian, I was a letter carrier in Albany. And what inspired me to be a librarian is that I like connecting people to information, which interestingly is what I did as a letter carrier. So it was actually kind of a good step over.
Thank you. Beth, your turn.
So I'm currently the director of the Brian Sutton Smith Library and Archives of Play at the Strong Museum here in Rochester. The museum also has a mini branch of the Rochester Public Library within our exhibits. So I kind of get to dabble in both special archives and special collections, as well as the public library. I'm past president of the academic and special library section of NYLA. So I'm that currently, so I'm in my last year on that board. And I also coordinate a group called RASCL, which is an acronym for Rochester Area Special Collections, Archives, and Libraries. And I do that through the support of our Regional Library Council, which is RRLC. Before coming to the Strong in 2014, I was a public librarian for over 15 years with a couple of stints in academia and early childhood education. My position right before coming to the Strong was the director of the Geneva Public Library, which is the central library of the Pioneer Library System. And what brought me to libraries, my maternal grandmother was a school librarian in the Finger Lakes for her entire career. She went to, she got her library degree from SUNY Albany, and would always tell me that when she was in library school, she had to board at somebody's house and walk to school every day after like doing all of their housework and all this stuff. And it was very dramatic of her to tell me all those details, but she's the one that first suggested I become a librarian. And, you know, I think probably I rolled my eyes at her at the time and said that that was really a totally lame idea. But then fast forward to me graduating with a degree in English, all of a sudden it didn't sound so lame when I needed something that I could actually do. And, you know, library school was kind of the only reasonable way to rebel in a family full of math and science teachers. So this is how I ended up where I am. And I'm not sure what other things that voters would want to know. I just have kind of been I grew up in New York, and then I did what I called my tour of the Mid-Atlantic region. I lived in Virginia and South Carolina and then Atlanta before coming back to New York. And so yeah, and I do always clarify to people that I live in the same town now that I grew up in, but I left for like 20 years. So I always have to clarify that I'm not that person that stays in their hometown. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. So our next question is, what makes you excited to be running for NYLA Council? And we'll start with Beth this time. Just gonna flip-flop it.
Sure. Yeah. So having served on council before as the ASLS president, you get to serve on council while you're the president. I can say for certain that what makes me most excited about being back on council is that special pasta salad that they get for the meetings that you have at the NYLA headquarters, because it's fabulous. But I guess runner up to the pasta salad is the opportunity to work with other dedicated professionals from all across the state, all different kinds of libraries with all different experiences. And, you know, all of us working together to contribute whatever skills and talents we have to something that makes a real tangible difference in people's lives, which is libraries and librarianship.
Beautiful, thank you. Liz, your turn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in every role that I've ever been in professionally, but also personally, I always advocate for the importance of having a seat at the table. And then, especially timely right now, using that privilege that comes with the position to represent those that have not yet been invited to the table, yet being hopefully the operative word there. So I find that I'm most passionate. I think this is probably true of anybody else that relates as an introvert. I find that I'm most passionate and effective when I get to speak on behalf of other people. So things can happen to me and I'll stay very quiet. But as soon as something happens to other people, I'm like Mama Bear. And I would, you know, sometimes that's one thing I need to work on, is pull that out for myself too. So if given the chance to serve on NYLA Council, the thing I would be most excited about is to play a part in the future direction of NYLA, but also to think about who doesn't have a seat at the table and also who I could represent that might not be at the table yet. Yeah. I would really be interested to see how I could provide leadership to members from all different library types. I know that each 3 years we cycle out from different types as a representative, but it's interesting to me how with CDLC or Capital District or NYLA, things like this, we can work together towards common goals. Most recently, in terms of experiences with NYLA, I completed the Developing Leaders program, and that gave me a taste of getting to collaborate with library workers from different regions across the state, but also different types of libraries. And in the initial retreat, we learned that we all had very similar issues and goals and concerns. And so lastly, and this was something that's been on my mind this week, actually since March, but given the current controversies about whether or not libraries should remain neutral or whether they should make statements about being neutral, I've been really impressed and inspired by NYLA not shying away from its core beliefs when it comes to putting out messages about current social justice and equity issues. And so I'd be very proud to be part of that and to continue those efforts.
Thank you so much. So our next question is, so how have your experience of a librarian prepared you to be NYLA president? And we will start with Liz.
No pressure, right?
No pressure at all.
No pressure. So thank you in advance for sharing some of these questions.
Yeah, you got it.
I had some soul searching Dear Diary moments over the last couple of nights. So when I think about what experiences have prepared me for being NYLA president, I start thinking about all the different roles that I've had in libraries. And I started as a clerk, and then 15 years later, I'm an associate director, and that's through public libraries and academic libraries, public services to technical services. And so it's hard to pinpoint exactly what experiences would prepare a person to be NYLA president. But that kind of leads me to wondering if anybody is ever fully prepared for anything that they haven't done before until you're faced with what you need to be prepared for. And so with that as the frame, I can't think of a challenge that I haven't been able to handle. And very recently, I wouldn't have said I was prepared for this current COVID-19 situation. And so we had to close our library, as everybody else probably listening in had to do, with very little notice. And the sudden transition from physical to remote services, I took a leadership role in that. And I'm proud to say that my library now has more services than we had physically in terms of our virtual workshops and reference services. And so that's something that we will maintain when we go back to in-person operations. And then the other experiences that I've had that I believe would prepare me for being NYLA president are the numerous committees that I've both participated as a member and then also graduated up to leading them and chairing them. And I think that the theme of a lot of those meetings is we're on the road to nowhere kind of runs through your head. And then there's always the people around the table saying, because that's the way we've always done it. And so you kind of have to work around those issues. Sorry, I'm getting an echo. I don't know if you're hearing an echo from me.
You sound good to me.
Okay. And so on those committees, usually we accomplish what we set out to do, but when we didn't, we learned something really big from the failure for the next time. And so all of those experiences are what lead me to running for NYLA president, and then also that make me feel comfortable in knowing that I could achieve what I need to as NYLA president.
Thank you. Beth, your turn.
So I always like to make myself sound really old by saying that I got my library degree in the 1900s, which is technically true. I've been a librarian since 1999, and since last century, I've pretty much done everything and anything that you can do at a library. So reference and instruction, collection development, serials, tech services, teen services for a little bit of time, administration of both a larger library and also a smaller branch. So I've done public, I've done academic, and now I'm a special library. I've been yelled at by patrons. I've been yelled at by board presidents. I've been, I've seen a lot of stuff. But I've seen a lot of good stuff too. And I think that, my varied experience in different library types and different situations and, and being in those kind of, having, being in a service position in any capacity really gives you an understanding for what people are going through in their day-to-day experience. And I think bringing that, I've done it, I've been there, and I've done a bunch of different things, and I can understand all the different voices that contribute to NYLA. And I think it helps to be able to, to help find common ground to work towards, supporting libraries of all kinds. I think that it's just sort of the larger picture of all the different things I've experienced and done, the good and the bad. It all adds up to what you can bring to the table.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. And our final NYLA question is, so as NYLA president, what is one vision that you have for NYLA that you will accomplish if elected? And we'll start with Beth.
So yeah, I think this is the time that I'm going to lodge the formal complaint on behalf of academic and special libraries that why is it our year that is we have a global pandemic? So everything is really hard this year. So it's like Liz, I've been thinking about these questions, and I would love to have a catchy, inspirational, slogan or one thing, but it's I think the thing that NYLA is going to really take on in the next probably 3 to 5 years is not very exciting. It's not very sexy. It's the financial straits that libraries of all types across the state are going to find themselves in as an aftermath of this crisis. So, I came back to New York in 2008 and watching NYLA, worked tirelessly year after year, sort of inch by inch to get funding up to the level that we had, all of that progress is really precarious position right now. So my goal for NYLA would be to fully advocate for funding restoration at the state level. And I think the good part of this crisis is that we're in a good position because we have these stories of what libraries have done to help their communities since we've been locked down, since we've had to close. Liz said that her library has more programs now than ever. So we can tell the story of how essential we are, and prove that we are, here's evidence that we improve people's lives. So, we need the support at the state level to continue the work that we've been doing, even in the new times, right? The new normal. We've been doing it in the new normal, and we need support.
Thank you. Liz, your turn.
Thank you. That's a really difficult. That's a really excellent answer to follow. I'm really in agreement with everything that you said, Beth. So when I think about one vision that I would have for NYLA that I would accomplish, or I would work towards accomplishing if elected. So in keeping with the goals that were outlined in NYLA's most recent strategic plan, I would continue working towards the vision of NYLA, and this is from their plan, as an inclusive and diverse professional organization that represents library workers in all types of libraries throughout New York State. And I've written enough strategic goals to know kind of the alphabet soup that has to go into them. But when you dissect the strategic goals, this one, it's fundamentally, I agree with this just on a fundamental level. And one thing I have always thought through working in public libraries and then also in academic, but more at the public level, is there's no acceptable reason why the racial makeup of library professionals shouldn't reflect the library communities. And I think of that when I'm at library conferences, and I think of that when I walk into most libraries and see who's working there versus who's patronizing and using the services. So as much work as we do, and I know that we all do a lot of work towards the goal, I think that the reality is we're not there yet. And I would work to further the initiatives that promote self-education, which has been a big theme right now for people posting how they're self-educating, and then library outreach and advocacy, hopefully towards a more diverse and inclusive NYLA. And again, kind of echo what Beth said. I think that we'll be tackling, it falls under the sexy category with everything kind of blowing up as it is.
Thank you. So those are all the NYLA prepared questions. I know that we had a few people trickle in. We're starting the Q&A portion. So we have some pre-submitted questions from our attendees. And if anything else comes to mind of those who are watching, just put it in the chat and we'll get to them after the pre-submitted. So the first question is, what do you see as NYLA's most important responsibility to New York's library community? We will start with Liz.
So I'll keep this pretty short and sweet.
Yeah.
I think that our most important responsibility right now is advocacy and also representation. So through NYLA's influence over legislation and then policy, and then also their focus on promoting the library as an essential educational institution, which I know has come up recently with the phased reopening institutions and where do we fall educationally, and then also continuing that fight for free and open information with open education and open movements. I think that that's our most important responsibility right now.
Unmuted.
Thank you. Beth, your turn.
Okay. So the communities that all of us are serving right now are so we've been devastated by the coronavirus and now devastated by police brutality, civil unrest. it's gone from parents who are just struggling with taking over their kids' schooling while they're working from home, and the technology issues that come up with that. But now you add on, how do you talk to your kids about what they're seeing in the news in their neighborhoods? The libraries that are serving these communities are faced with cuts and furloughs, layoffs. Your friends groups can't have the book sale that helps buy books for your community. So I feel like the libraries that NYLA serve and in the next year, probably more, are really going to have to face inward, and that NYLA needs to be the outward facing for the state. So that means taking on funding at the state level, advocating for libraries, because all of us, within my institution, I'm advocating for, the restoration of my budget. Public libraries are advocating with their municipality for, restoration of their budgets. So I think that NYLA can really take one of those burdens off of our member libraries. Like we've got the big picture of the state. You really focus on helping your community through these trying times and working to get that local or institutional funding restored. I think that's kind of a nice division of labor. Like, we're in this together, we're working, let's split this up and tackle it. So that's what I really feel that NYLA should do for the library community.
Thank you both so much. We touched upon this a little bit in the other questions, but if you want to say something that you haven't said so far that you wanted to, that'd be great as well. So given the situation with the pandemic, other than safety, what do you feel is the biggest challenge? And we'll start with Beth.
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about funding again, but it's related. I think that one of the things that this pandemic has shown us, it's really shown a spotlight on the fact that the digital divide is real and it has real consequences. Even for libraries, one of the things that AS
Muted.
done this year is we developed this we call it a rapid response mini grants, and this was for libraries, special collections, small college libraries, that had to shut down and work from home, and haven't been prepared for that. So they might need a scanner to continue a digitization project, or they might need to upgrade their Zoom so they can provide programs, or their staff might work in a rural area and they didn't have internet that could handle the work that they were putting in from home, and that's on top of the struggles for both urban and rural communities that don't have the access to reliable internet, reliable technology. So it's so I think that that's another challenge, is that we now know we can show you how this digital divide affects kids. I mean, I'm in a suburban community, and there were kids that had to wait, a couple of weeks before they even had a computer to get onto the classes. Like, this is not something that only happens in some communities. It's every community has this issue, and I think it's part of equitable access. We need to see what about helping with technology, access to technology for all of our communities and libraries.
Unmuted.
Thank you. Liz, your turn.
Oh, thank you. So a few challenges I think that we haven't touched on haven't touched on yet in terms of the pandemic that's been going on. I think that the biggest challenge that comes to mind for me, it's sort of twofold, but related. So appropriate staffing levels during reopening, and a lot of us are furloughs and layoffs, and then at the same time we're coming up with reopening plans and phased reopening plans, which might require more or different staffing, and yet we have reduced staffing in a lot of cases. I know we do at RPI. And then secondly, I think that during a time of crisis when we may not all have the same opinions, I know with the phased reopening, there's been conversations where some people that I know that work in libraries, they don't think that they should be expected to risk their health for something like curbside services for bestsellers and different, things that might not be seen as essential for everybody. But then other people want to get back to work as quickly as possible and then with as few restrictions as possible. So there's sort of a disagreement going on about what even constitutes essential services that we offer. And then when I do assessment at the academic level, there's another, and also like proving, so we have furloughs going on right now. And one of the things we have to do is give sort of measurable indications of the services that we're providing, even though we're not open. And so I think that there's an added challenge of sort of coming up with creative ways to demonstrate our worth while we're also in sort of triage mode, and it adds time to sort of assess your services and show your worth. So I think that as we begin to reopen, and then also with protesters in the streets and with less social distancing going on, and I think that's rightfully, I'll be out myself, and I normally wouldn't be out right now, but I think that we need to prepare for that second wave coming in the fall. And so a challenge that I see is how can a statewide organization like NYLA that represents all these different types of libraries, how can we best share ideas for guidelines and best practices and policies, but that are applicable or adaptable for everybody sitting in their own problem that they're looking for a solution. I think a good example right now is that coronavirus response page that NYLA has on the website. And I can see that being useful, but also adaptable depending on the different leadership role you have, if you're working on policies, and depending on the different types of libraries you have. So at a certain point, I think that information can be adapted based on the type of library you're at, but it's going to be a challenge to be applicable to everybody. So.
Thank you both so much. Our next question, and also I've been unmuting and muting myself just because I have a little bit of feedback on my end, so that's why you see me nodding and not actually responding to the question and your answers. So the next question is, what would you do to promote the idea that libraries are still relevant? And then another question on top of that is, how would you address technology needs for public libraries? I know you both have kind of alluded to this in your answers. So, Beth, do you want to go first?
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of touched on this. I think that the key to our promotion of the idea that we're still relevant, the stories of what New York libraries have done during this crisis, I think those illustrate unequivocally that libraries are relevant and actually quite nimble in changing to meet the changing needs of your communities. If you had asked any of us on March 6th if we thought that we could pack up and move everything online, we would have all laughed at you. Schools went online. Nobody expected that, and libraries circulated hotspots. They drove mobile, Wi-Fi mobiles to different neighborhoods that needed them. examples and stories like this are crucial to the advocacy that's needed to everybody that, yes, we're still here, we're still important, we're still serving our communities. And I mentioned just preview 20 has shown us that the digital divide is far from resolved. And I would think that that's something that should be looked at. The legislative agenda is, you know, a solution needs to happen as other source of funding or funding at the state level that can help not only the libraries but the communities that we're in. I don't know if there's another group that we can partner with to say, you know, this access to technology is, and it needs to happen across the state. But those are my thoughts. Do I have the immediate answer to them? No. I think it's going to take a lot of boots on the ground. It's phone calls. It's going to take a lot of advocacy to get the technology needs addressed.
Thank you. Liz, your turn.
Thank you. So when I pondered this idea of promoting, how do we promote the idea that libraries are still relevant, sort of the inherent subtext is, our libraries still relevant, right? And Beth, I think you did a really good examples of just some of the more current reasons why we're still obviously relevant right now. But I think that we all know, well, I say we as our audience of NYLA members, I think that we all know that libraries are relevant. So I took away from that question, how do we promote that idea? And my foundation for approaching that kind of thought came from my experience as an outreach librarian. And as an outreach librarian, I had this opportunity to go to a library marketing and communications conference, and all of the conferences I went to before that were instruction-based or ALA or ACRL. And so I end up at this library marketing and communications conference, and everybody's asking me to see my marketing plan, and I'm thinking I registered for the wrong conference, right? and so after a few days there, I start to realize it's not magic. It's just a field that I didn't go to school for, right? And so when you go to the 101 sessions at that conference, we learned about strategic marketing plans and campaigns, social media campaigns and social media ambassadors, and then like how to develop the partnerships and maintain the partnerships and content marketing. And it was like suddenly taking a marketing class when I had never taken one before. But then I go back to work and I realize the templates exist. They're just not in the instruction sandboxes that I was used to looking. And so we can take these marketing and promotion templates and adapt them or apply them to what we do in libraries with our services. And it kind of feels like you're getting away with something, but then you start to see the results through people realizing the relevancy of libraries. Maybe they didn't see them as marketable services before. And then in terms of addressing technology needs of public libraries, so I left, the last time I worked in a public library was in 2016. And so my first thought there is, I hadn't thought of that. You know, in a couple of years, I've been in academic libraries. And so I think that it comes down to that strategic formula of defining those needs. And then again, that comes in terms of the different members that are at that table talking, but defining the needs and then identifying barriers. And then also the innovative solutions. And the best solution would be more funding, right? But, you know, spoiler alert. So I think that the strategic approach would be to, and this is kind of my manager hat, or so to speak, coming out, but to identify the technology needs that might be solutions to some of the problems, and then to go out and manage the procurement of the resources to improve the situation. It may not solve the situation, and I think that's where the realist has to come out. But if you can make progress towards a solution, then I think that it may not be as quick as we want, but if we can make measurable progress, that's a start. So not the most fun answer, but it's how I would approach it.
Thank you both so much. Our next question is, how do you see libraries moving forward or staying vital the next decade and beyond? And we'll start with Liz.
So I absolutely love this question. Thank you for whoever submitted this question. And this brought me back to why I wanted to be a librarian in the first place, that idea of connecting people with resources and with information. And so I think that we and libraries, I think that we move forward when we actually listen to our community. And it that sounds like a catchphrase, but where I was coming from is I thought back to that first lesson of the reference interview, and you're so excited to help someone, right? That's why you went to library school for the most part, or it's where you ended up after going to library school. And they sit down and they start to ask their question, and then you're like, I know what they need, and you want to jump in and help them find what they need. But I think that we forget sometimes that we might not even know what they need until we really digest their question and figure out what their needs are. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but like a personal example for me right now is, and I'll throw my workshops under the bus here. I started a workshop program at our PI libraries, and we didn't have workshops, and then last semester we had them in person, and now we've gone virtual. But for the in-person ones, I really wanted students to come to the basic library research skills. That was kind of my baby. And then in addition, we had some citation management workshops that other staff were teaching. And so we wanted to have a more comprehensive workshop program. And so of course, nobody signed up for the research skills because why would they? And so many people signed up for the citation management workshop that there was a wait list. And so what I had to admit here is students are going to find the information where they want to find it, but then they need to know how to write for their grade. And so one thing that we sort of facing that reality, one adaptation that we took recently, very recently, is we, and by we, I do not mean me, we implement this new plugin service where if a student is on Wikipedia doing their research, it'll show them on their screen what the library. And so then by clicking on that, they'll end up on the library site. And so I feel like for us to stay vital, but then also we have to listen to what our users are telling us that they need and not what we think they need, and then meeting them where they were, and try to get them the services that we think they need, but also what they're telling us that they need, which we might not even know, right? We might not even have the read they need until we listen. So.
Beautiful. Beth, your turn.
Sure. Yeah, I agree 100% with Liz. There's the way you move forward and stay vital is listening to your community. She just gave a great example in her library how that works. You know, for me, very specialized research collection. If I'm not listening to the people who are researching, the people who are scholars in the field of video games or play or games or that kind of thing, I'm not going to know what I need to put my resources in. I'm not going to know what the best thing to available is. So I don't move forward without meeting the needs of my community. So really, thriving in the next decade or beyond, which, when I first read this question, I was like, I'm thinking like 6 hours ahead at this point in my life, right? Like things change so quickly. But so, thriving in the next decade or next 6 hours looks different for everybody, but it depends on knowing what your community needs and being able to adapt to meet those needs. And but I also think that, you know, we change to meet the needs, but we always have our core values, right? So you know, we're adapting and meeting people's needs, but it's always from the perspective of us as what we hold dear as a profession, right? Access, equitable access, anti-censorship, you know, a good use of community funds. Like, all of these are values that we bring to it, and that's what makes libraries libraries.
Thank you. Our last question is, what do you see as a priority of NYLA next year? And we touched upon this a little bit, but it's also a good closing question. And we will start with Beth.
Yeah, we've talked about this in a couple of different capacities, but I see a priority for NYLA in this coming year is the restoration of funding at the state level, and supporting libraries of all types in the state as they work to stabilize their local or institutional funding. I think that this touches on the technology, it touches on the staffing, it touches on pretty much every aspect of what we do. You know, like I said, it's not the fun thing, but you know, I think that this sort of what's happening is forcing our hands. Like, we've got to go back to the drawing board and try to regain the progress that we had made in the years leading up to 2020, right?
Right. Thank you. Liz, your turn.
So I think that, and Beth, that resonated for me with you're thinking ahead 6 hours. And so when someone asks you about the next year, it's sort of deer in headlights, because you're like, I don't actually know what day it is. So I think it's Friday, but yes, I completely agree with you on that. And I'm sort of I've been thinking so much here about politics and how libraries have a part in politics, right? And how do we remain open to everybody and open to all of our members, and respect everybody's politics, but then also have a strength as an organization in educating people with an election year coming up, or here. And so I think that the biggest priority that I can really think of right now is that with everything going on, regardless of where I'll stand, I think that we need to use NYLA's reach to mobilize and also educate all of the different library communities, urge them to vote like their library actually depends on it, right? And then a lot of what I've been reading about and hearing about lately has to do with the possible mail-in voting with pandemic, and how the pandemic might change voting. And I think that the community center aspect of a library, in terms of academic campuses and students living on campus, where the library can fit into that, but school libraries with students coming of voting age, right? And I think that the libraries in New York are a really good way to educate people about candidate choices, their civic rights, their voting options, and their voting options could be different. This could be a totally different year of how we vote. And so that's all theoretical, right? But I think a good example is how libraries approach educating about the census. And I know that in an academic library, we don't have as much census promotion, except maybe for international students or students voting outside of their hometown. But I know that in public libraries and school libraries, that importance of completing the census, especially if you're a member of an underrepresented community, I think that model can be a good way to think about the reach or the power that we might have during political campaigns that will really change the direction of education in libraries.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you both so much for participating in this forum. That concludes our question and answer section. Just a few reminders to those attending. So first, thank you for joining. Second, as a reminder, voting opens June 15th, closes July 15th. You have to be a NYLA member in order to vote. You can check that by logging into your account. We will have this forum video shared on the NYLA Candidate Forum page, probably by early next week. I have to download everything. That takes a little while. Yeah, that's all the reminders I have. And just make sure to vote. Thank you all so much for attending. And thank you for our candidates for stepping up.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for letting us have this venue.
Of course. All right. Thank you, everyone.